Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and it's the most wonderful time of the year. No, it's not Christmas. Today is the day that I release my new season deep dive. This has become a tradition at this point. A few days before the start of every season, I do a ton of analysis, hours and hours, simming matchups, figuring out which Pokemon I think are actually going to be worth your time, and which Pokemon only look good but aren't actually going to be that strong. So today's video is going to be a long one. It's going to be a lot of me yapping and talking about the things that I found. So sit back, grab a snack, grab a beverage, because we're probably going to be here for a while. So without further ado, let's hop into it. Okay, the first change that we're taking a look at is going to be the Drill Run buff. Drill Run is being reworked from 80-45 to 70-40. This means Drill Run is now going to be a ground-type clone of the move Aqua Jet. Now, a lot of different Pokemon that we've seen in Meta's past learn Drill Run, so the question is, which of these Pokemon are actually going to be helped and which Pokemon are actually hurt by the change? Well, to start with, we're going to start with the clear winner, and that is Fearow. Fearow already has very strong meta matchups. It has surged in popularity over the second half of this season because the Peck Drill Peck spam and its very high attack stat mean that it wins charge attack priority against a lot of opposing Pokemon, means that Fearow is an absolute threat to be reckoned with. Now, Fearow gets better pacing on its coverage move of Drill Run, going from 6-6-5 to straight 5. This is a massive buff for Fearow. Now Fearow can just stay in matchups like Empoleon and just win those matchups because it paces identically, it wins charge attack priority, and Drill Run is going to be shredding through Empoleon. With this new pacing, Fearow also becomes a dramatically better safe switch, as with only one Peck energy head start, it can now win the zeros against Unova Stunfisk. Stunfisk will win the head-to-head matchup by outpacing it because it's 5-4 to discharge and 5-5 to Drill Run, but if you save switch Fearow and get at least one Peck head start, then suddenly you're guaranteeing switch advantage or shield advantage from Unova Stunfisk. So Fearow is a massive winner. It absolutely loves this change because even with the damage decrease, its attack stat is so high that Drill Run is still going to do quite a lot of damage. Next up, we have Seaking. Seaking currently runs Peck, Legacy Icy Wind, and Legacy Drill Run. So Seaking is going to go from 6-6-5 Drill Run to straight 5. So this is an improvement in pacing for Seaking. But why am I not as excited for Seaking as I am for Fearow? Well, because Seaking does not get same type attack bonus on any of its charge moves, I think that the damage reduction will actually make it feel a little bit underwhelming. Icy Wind spam is still going to be strong on Seaking, but I still think that it's going to be more of a limited meta demon or kind of an anti-meta open Great League Pokemon rather than a harder meta pick like Fearow. Just because without that same type attack bonus and with a lower attack stat, even though it's going to have the ability to kind of survive in matchups with Icy Wind debuffs, it's really not going to be outputting a lot of damage. So even though Seaking is definitely going to be improved by getting the better pacing, I don't think Seaking is going to be breaking into the open Great League meta in a significant way. Next up, we have a trio of Pokemon that I honestly kind of put them all together because they're pretty washed, but they're all anti-flyers, and that's Alolan Sandslash, Dunsparce, and Dugong. To start with Dunsparce, I think this is basically a strict nerf for Dunsparce. The only pacing advantage Dunsparce would get out of the cheaper Drill Run would be on its third cycle. Normally it's 4-3-4-3, it would be 4-3-3-3. That is really not worth having your Drill Run, which is your most damaging move, suddenly do less damage. So I think Dunsparce is strictly worse as a result of this change. Dugong will get better pacing, but Ice Shard is still pretty terrible. I think Dugong will be a playable open Great League Mon, but I don't think it's going to be a staple. And finally, Alolan Sandslash. Alolan Sandslash does appreciate the faster steel coverage and a faster move to hit back against water types. However, due to Licky Licky's oversaturation in the open Great League meta, Sandslash is forced onto Powder Snow. And if you're on Powder Snow, even with the faster Drill Run, it's still not going to make those water type matchups particularly strong for Sandslash. So I do think Sandslash is going to be better, but I really don't see Sandslash breaking out as like a top meta star. Its defensive typing is extremely strong, so I wouldn't be surprised to see some Sandslash usage, but overall, I'm not a big believer in Sandslash personally, because even with this newer pacing, it would really love if Licky Licky went away, so that way it could run Shadow Claw. With Shadow Claw and this new pacing, in a meta that was free of Licky Licky, so that way Shadow Claw wouldn't be to its detriment, I think Sandslash could do things. So, I think Sandslash is improved overall, but realistically, I don't think we're going to see a lot of them. Next up, we're talking about Flash Cannon. Flash Cannon is getting a buff. It's having its energy cost decreased from 70 to 65, which is an estimate. Realistically, unless it drops to 60, Registeel is not doing much in the open Great League. While Registeel will be better, the opportunity cost of Registeel being just strictly worse than Aegislash means that I realistically don't think there's much of a reason to ever run Registeel in the Open Great League. However, if for some reason they end up buffing it to where it is 60 energy instead of 70, then I think Registeel would probably be very, very bad. However, in the Ultra League, I do think that Registeel could see quite a lot of play. Registeel has a truly absurd stat product in the Ultra League, and the fact that there's no Aegislash there means that there isn't a Pokemon that does what it wants to do, but just in a significantly better way. So I think that Registeel could see some Open Ultra League play. It already saw a little bit of Open Ultra League play this season, even before the Flash Cannon buff, just due to the fact that it is so insanely tanky, and people don't really team build with Registeel in mind. So I think this is more of an Ultra League focused change, but if we get to June 2nd and we end up learning that it's 60, then we're probably going to see a lot of the tin can. The next change we'll be taking a look at is going to be Hurricane. Hurricane is getting its energy cost decreased, and my estimate is from 65 to 60. This would make Hurricane a pretty strong move, 110 for 60, and this is mainly going to be a buff for Pelipper. Realistically, not much else of value runs Hurricane. One could argue a Pokemon like Articuno, but Articuno already struggles quite a bit as is. This does help Pelipper a little bit, as Pelipper is now going to be, I believe, 8-7 to Hurricane instead of having to farm up to 9 to the first, which was absolutely atrocious. However, Pelipper's big issue is always going to be the fact that it is a very inconsistent Pokemon. If Pelipper is able to have a Weather Ball shielded or land a Hurricane, it's going to feel exceedingly strong. But if the reverse is true, if a Weather Ball gets no shielded in a neutral matchup, or if a Hurricane is shielded, then Pelipper is going to feel like a pretty big liability. So, I would argue that this is a very volatile Pokemon. It's definitely going to be improved. It likes the fact that it's cheaper to Hurricane, but there's still such a massive disparity in the energy cost between Weather Ball and Hurricane that I think playing Pelipper, it's going to be a fun mon to use, but I don't think people are going to be running it for very long just because of the frustration of if you end up having that Hurricane shielded or if you bait and they call it, then it's going to feel like a very weak pick. But overall, the upside is very high. The downside is also pretty significant as well. So I think we'll see some Pelipper usage. Being a water flying type, I think, offers some pretty nice advantages in the current meta. There's a lot of cores, at least that were used this season, that would be core broken by a strong water flyer. However, not to get ahead of myself here, there are several other water flyers also getting buffed. So Pelipper will have some pretty stiff competition in that category. The next change we'll be talking about is going to be the buff to Dragon Ascent. Dragon Ascent is getting a pretty massive rework. It's having its damage decreased from 150 to 110, and its energy cost decreased as well, in my estimate from 70 to 45. This would make Dragon Ascent an extremely efficient move, but unfortunately still does nothing for Rayquaza. Rayquaza misses when Breaking Swipe was a strong move so badly. Rayquaza, it's absurdly attack weighted, but it is incredibly frail. It performed very well in the Master League because of the synergy of being a Glassy Mon with a high attack stat and a move that had guaranteed debuffs. Now that Breaking Swipe is expensive, it is poor DPE, and it's only a 50-50 chance of debuffing, suddenly Rayquaza ends up being pretty spectacularly terrible in the Master League. Even a big rework to Dragon Ascent cannot save this Pokemon. It has absolutely dismal sims. If there's any hope for the Rayquaza enthusiasts, it would lie in Mega Master League, where Rayquaza, when it's Mega, gets a massive stat product, so would actually be able to take some hits. However, I still think that Rayquaza, kind of due to awkward moveset synergy, could be a little bit uncomfortable there as well, but at the very least, Dragon Ascent hits incredibly hard, and with its monster attack stat in Mega Masters, would do a ton of damage even with the base power decrease. So unfortunately, Rayquaza, as far as the regular Master League goes, is staying pretty spectacularly terrible, but if there's any hope, it may lie in Mega Masters, but unfortunately, Mega Masters is not currently on PD Poke, so I wasn't able to sim that. So it's kind of just a fingers crossed and hope it can do something in Mega Masters, but honestly, I'm not super optimistic. The next change we'll be taking a look at is the change to Earth Power. Earth Power is getting an energy cost decrease from 55 to 50. I actually have a typo on this slide. It says 65 to 50. No, it is 55 to 50. So apologies there. And yes, that does mean it is a Gastrodon buff. Now, this is a pretty big buff to a Pokemon named Seismitoad. Seismitoad in this update is also getting access to Icy Wind. So its moveset is going to be Mud Shot, Icy Wind, and Earth Power. This means that Seismitoad will end up being an extremely flexible Pokemon and honestly could be utilized pretty successfully as a safe switch. Being a water ground type, it only has one weakness, the double weakness to grass, and grass types aren't really a thing right now. Most of the time, people try and counter Mud Boys by trying to send in flyers, but with Icy Wind, Then it has the ability to hit back for big super effective damage into flyers, and it's able to apply guaranteed debuffs to kind of increase its bulk, and it already has some pretty good stats. I think Seismitoad could be a very strong anti-meta option. It also looks pretty decent as a core breaker in the Ultra League, as a pretty common trio that was used in the Ultra League this season was Zygarde, Tinkaton, and the Voltage Fortress. And what do you know, Icy Wind plus the newly buffed Earth Power Seismitoad beats all three. So I think it's probably more of an anti-meta Pokemon. I think it has high upside to where it could sneak into being a full-time meta contender depending on how the meta shakes out. But at least right off the bat, it looks like a pretty strong pick, and it's also a Pokemon that looks very strong at a Mudshot advantage, for example, if it was used as a save switch. Next up, we have Hippowdon. Hippowdon can replace Scorching Sands for the better move, which is now Earth Power. The only advantage to Scorching Sands now over Earth Power would be the fact that Scorching Sands does have a debuff chance, but Earth Power is now just a strictly better move. It's the same cost, but it is more base power. So any Mon that learns both Scorching Sands and Earth Power can safely disregard Scorching Sands and just run Earth Power from here on out. And finally, I have to talk about the Mud Slap, the fast move pressure slop, and that is going to be Gastrodon and Toedscruel. Gastrodon, unfortunately, with this buff, does look like it's simming very, very well. I think that Gastrodon's presence in a meta is usually a very negative one, as it's a very inflexible, very RPS pick. It wins hard and it loses hard. With Earth Power now having the same energy cost as Water Pulse, but now offering higher base damage, the Gastrodons are probably going to switch over to Earth Power, and that means that they're going to have even less coverage. I do think that they're probably going to see increased usage, which is unfortunate. More so Gastrodon than Toedscruel, but Toedscruel is also getting a buff with Wrap getting a damage increase as well. So unfortunately, there is some good here, like Seismitoad looks really cool, but also some bad, because man, I do not like Gastrodon. The next buff we'll be taking a look at is going to be the buff to Gust. The fast move Gust is getting its energy generation increased, in my estimation from 12 to 14, to give it the same parameters as Confusion. Now, Pidgeot currently learns Legacy Gust, and Gust is being given out to both Lumineon and Swanna this season. To start with Pidgeot, I think Pidgeot is a very difficult Pokemon to try and forecast, because Pidgeot has a truly insane amount of different movesets. It can run Wing Attack, it can run Gust, it has Air Cutter, it has Brave Bird, it has Feather Dance, it is Heat Wave, it's getting Twister this season as well. So there are truly almost infinite moveset possibilities for Pidgeot. I'm still not a massive believer in Pidgeot personally. I know that Pidgeot, because it has moves like Feather Dance and Brave Bird, if you're able to successfully bait in the Sims with Feather Dance and then land a Brave Bird, it's going to have an insanely positive win rate. However, the inverse is also true. It's a very inconsistent Mon where if you end up having the Brave Bird shielded or if you end up having a Feather Dance no shielded, then that could end up being pretty rough. I think Pidgeot would probably more lean towards Air Cutter and Heat Wave. It could also consider like a Twister Brave Bird set, but I think Pidgeot, it'll very much depend on how the meta shakes out around it as to what moveset ends up being popular, but I think there's going to be a lot of trial and error with people trying different Pidgeot movesets. I think playing against it could end up being kind of frustrating just because it could know any one of like 5 or 6 charge moves and you're not going to know which. But Pidgeot now does have quite a few coverage options, with getting Heat Wave last season and now getting access to Twister this season, and Gust having better energy generation. So I think we might see a bit more of Pidgeot as people try and figure out if any of the many movesets are actually good. I don't have super high hopes for it actually being good, but I think we'll see it quite a bit to start with as people just go moveset testing. Next up, we have to talk about Swanna. Swanna is getting access to Gust and Aqua Jet this season, so it is getting very heavily buffed. I think that Swanna could be a pretty decent player in the NAIC meta. I don't think it's going to see high usage, but especially as the Shadow, it offers a truly insane amount of fast move pressure, and if teams are not prepared for it, I think it could potentially be a bit of a degen presence in that meta. The moveset it's probably going to be running is going to be Gust, Aqua Jet, and Fly. It does have Hurricane, which is getting buffed, but I assume you would probably want the cheaper flying move, since Gust, while it has some pretty solid energy generation, getting all the way up to a Hurricane is quite expensive. Next up, we have Lumineon, which is also getting Gust this season, and Lumineon has Silver Wind, which is getting buffed from 60 damage all the way up to 75. Lumineon is an absolute tank. It has a massive stat product, and for the moveset, it's going to be your choice of Gust or Waterfall as a fast move, and then Aqua Tail and Silver Wind as the charge moves. I had to re-record that bit because I said Aqua Jet and Silver Wind, and it definitely does not learn Aqua Jet. That's Aqua Tail. I think that Lumineon is going to be kind of a bulky, neutral presence, but unfortunately, a little bit like Sea King, it's really going to struggle to do any kind of meaningful damage. I think that it could be probably at its strongest in the 2s, where it's kind of able to outlast things due to how bulky it is. But I think when shields are down, Luminion's really going to struggle to deal any kind of meaningful damage, just because even though it's very bulky, its charge attacks just don't hit very hard. Aqua Tail, not a hard hitting move, and Silverwind, even though it's getting buffed, does not get same type attack bonus, and Luminion has a very low attack stat. So I think Luminion will probably be a playable anti-Metamon, but I don't see it breaking into the meta in a massive way. Although if we're going to see it, it's probably going to be in that NAIC limited meta that's coming up. Next up, we have to talk about the nerf to Charm. Charm is getting its damage decreased from 13 down to 12. This is a very long overdue change, but in my eyes, the developers were too cautious here and they did not nerf it enough. Wigglytuff, for many seasons, has been a very degenerate, very fast move pressure heavy presence on the Great League meta. Its typing means that it will basically always be good. Fairy and Normal just has insane defensive synergy, and Wigglytuff has always just had insane fast move pressure. It's always been kind of a 2-shield monster. Now, the developers tried to rework it in seasons past. They decreased the damage a little bit and increased the energy generation quite a bit, and in my eyes, they ended up just making it better. It's still at a ton of fast move pressure, but now it got to Icy Winds faster, so arguably, it didn't really change it. It ended up just being still a very aggressive 2-shield presence, where Wigglytuff was never playing for energy, was always just double shielding, icy winding, and brute forcing its way through matchups. With its old stats, Wigglytuff just had insanely positive neutral matchups. Not only did it have an incredibly useful typing, but it basically beat everything neutrally, so it was a very difficult Pokemon to try and team build for. However, with the damage decrease from 13 to 12, Wigglytuff's neutral matchups this upcoming season are going to suffer a little bit. Due to the fact that its typing is so insane, it's still going to see play, but it's not going to feel quite as oppressive as it did. Arguably, because no other Pokemon in the game actively uses Charm, I think they definitely could have gotten away with taking it from 13 to 11. Wigglytuff, it's been good for years. I think there's a certain point at which a Pokemon has been too good for too long. It's time to kill it and let other Pokemon, different fairy types, rise to the top. So in my eyes, they did not go far enough with the Wigglytuff nerf. Granted, I'll take what I can get, but I think they should have been more aggressive here and taken it from 13 down to 11. The next buff we'll be talking about is the buff to Wrap. Wrap is having its damage increased from 60 to 70. Some notable Pokemon that do learn Wrap are Milotic, Shadow Dragonair, and Lickitung. Lickitun's matchups do get better as a result of the extra damage from Wrap, running a mono normal set of Lick and then Body Slam and Wrap, but unfortunately with Licky still being the dominant normal type and Licky completely destroying Lickitung, I don't think we're really going to see much of Lickitung outside of maybe Evolution Cup. For Shadow Dragonair, I do think this is an attempt to kind of revitalize Shadow Dragonair. The extra damage on Wrap is nice because it would love to throw Wraps and be able to boost up that Dragon Breath damage, but I still don't think it's going to be anything more than an anti-meta Pokemon. Finally, Milotic. I think Milotic is going to remain a very strong limited meta demon. Basically, anytime the power level is just a little bit lower, Milotic is there and it is an absolute terror. I don't think this is enough to have it have legit open Great League play, but I do really like to see Milotic improving because I think Milotic is a very cool Pokemon. Its charge moves are pretty much set in Aqua Tail and Wrap, but it has the ability to run either Dragon Tail or Waterfall, so it does have quite a lot of flexibility. The next change we'll be taking a look at, probably the biggest one, is going to be the buff to Energy Ball. Energy Ball is having its damage decreased from 90 to 80, but it's also having its energy cost decreased as well. My estimation is 55 to 45. Having Energy Ball become an 80-45 move is a monster buff for Jumpluff and Kanto Ninetales. Now, a lot of people focused on the Alolan Ninetales during the Vulpix Com Day, but Kanto Ninetales did also get a new legacy move. That move is Energy Ball, and I really hope you evolved some Kanto Ninetales during that Com Day. Kanto Ninetales, if the move is 80-45, which is what we are expecting, with Legacy Emperor as his fast move, would be straight 4 to Weather Ball and straight 5 to Energy Ball. This means that Kanto Ninetales would be able to keep pace with a lot of the very threatening water types in the meta. A lot of people were clamoring for a grass buff. Well, allow me to introduce you to the grass type. Its name is Kanto Ninetales. Specifically the non-shadow Kanto Ninetales. Ninetales is very bulky, and as the non-shadow, it actually has winning matchups in all even shields against Shadow Quagsire, although the 2s does require some baiting, just because you survive the Aqua Tail and the Mud Shots, and you can just pick up the one-hit knockout with the Energy Ball. The non-shadow Ninetales can also tank a Scorching Sands from Diggersby surprisingly well. So I think that Kanto Ninetales is going to be a pretty big player in this new meta. Obviously, it does not have any coverage for dragons, so I think when people look to try and counter Kanto Ninetales, the best bet are going to be trying to go for dragons, the hard wallet, or just go for some very bulky, very neutral Pokemon like Galarian Corsola or Licky Licky. One of the most common team building archetypes this season in the Open Great League was Steel plus Water. To start the season, it was Fortress plus Feraligatr. After the Tinkaton Calm Day, how many times have you seen Tinkaton double Water? I bet it's probably close to 100. Well, teams like that just simply can't exist in a Kanto Ninetales meta. Because imagine if you're running Fortress, Feraligatr, and Quagsire, and you lead into Energy Ball Kanto Ninetales. You can't stay in with the Fortress, you save switch Feraligatr, but before you can get to the Hydro Cannon, Ninetales already makes the Energy Ball. Because of the one-turn switch, they outpace you and they just strictly win that matchup. So I think it's going to cause people to have to try and team build in a bit of a different way, because it's going to exert a lot of pressure on team comps like that. Next up, we have to talk about Jumpluff. Jumpluff did get nerfs, the Aerial Ace rework, making Jumpluff a lot worse than it used to be, but with this big Energy Ball buff, I think Jumpluff has a very real chance to be back. Now, Jumpluff is going to have straight 5 pacing to Energy Ball because Fairy Wind does have the same energy generation as Ember. So, Jumpluff for the first time in its life is actually going to be a convincing anti-water. Previously, Jumpluff actually had a pretty bad matchup in Feraligatr. If Feraligatr ever baited once, the game was over and your Jumpluff was getting KO'd by double super effective Ice Beam. Now that Energy Ball is every 5, Feraligatr can no longer bait its way out. So Jumpluff is just going to run Energy Ball and Acrobatics. Energy Ball as the bait and Acrobatics as the nuke. With Jumpluff's already insane stats, I think this will bring Jumpluff back to some pretty significant relevancy. Jumpluff's ability to hit for really significant damage in its bad matchups, like let's say it gets stuck against the Fire type with Acrobatics, and actually beat the Waters for the first time ever with this new cheap Energy Ball, I think is a pretty big plus for Jumpluff. Additionally, the fact that both Jumpluff and the Kanto Ninetales should have very strong matchups into Bug-Bite Fortress, I think is also a pretty big plus. They're Pokemon with grass coverage, but they don't auto-lose to Fortress, because we know Fortress is not going anywhere. And finally, Abomasnow. People are probably waiting, Henry, do you believe in Abomasnow? No, I do not. This is a Fortress meta. If you lose to Fortress, I don't know why I should pay attention to you, and Abomasnow gets absolutely destroyed by Fortress. Add to that the fact that when you're team building around Abomasnow, what do you normally put in the back? I'll wait a few seconds. You always see Abomasnow double Water. Well, there's a Pokemon that's not going to let that happen. His name is Kanto Ninetales. So, unless you're running Pokemon that have like big, super effective damage in terms of like water fast food pressure, like let's say a Dondozo or something like that, then if you have like Abomasnow plus Feraligatr, you're just getting swept by the Kanto Ninetales. So I think Abomasnow will be improved, but I'm not as big of a believer in Abomasnow as I am in Jumpluff and Kanto Ninetales, because I think it's very awkward to try and team build around that Pokemon. The next change we'll be talking about is going to be the buff to Silverwind. Silverwind is getting a big damage increase from 60 to 75. Realistically, this doesn't really do anything because nothing of note really learns Silverwind. The main Pokemon that we talked about earlier was Lumineon, and honestly, even with the damage buff, I still think that Lumineon could underwhelm. And taking a look across a lot of other Pokemon that learn Silverwind, most of them just have better moves, so they don't end up running it anyway. So I don't really have a lot to say about the Silverwind buff. I guess it might be cool in some future limited metas, but for the Open Great League, I think this is probably going to be a buff that by season's end, people are going to say, oh, I completely forgot that Silverwind got buffed. Alright, that is all of the move changes. Now we'll talk about the attack availability updates. The first change is going to be a buff to Earthquake. Earthquake is getting its damage increased from 110 to 120. This benefits Pokemon like Clodsire, Swampert, and Walrein. To start with Clodsire, I do think that this is a pretty nice buff for Clodsire. There were a lot of matchups where Clodsire typically had to go double Earthquake, where now it could probably go Earthquake into Stone Edge, just because Earthquake does do that little bit of extra damage. Clodsire having a very low attack stat, having a little bit of extra damage in neutral matchups, I think will actually go a very long way for it. Clodsire doesn't really have the problem that the other two Pokemon have of being very bait dependent, because Clodsire, it's so bulky, but its charge attacks are all very expensive. So like the difference between Stone Edge and Earthquake isn't as significant as the difference between like Hydro Cannon and Earthquake or Icicle Spear and Earthquake. And speaking of large differences between charge moves in terms of energy costs, we gotta talk about the Swampert and the Walrein. Realistically, I don't think this is doing much for either Pokemon. Are they going to be better? Yes, but they're still going to have the same issues that currently plague them, which is the fact that they are very inconsistent. This is what I kind of harped on for a while about with Pelipper. when you're able to get the Earthquake landed and potentially have like a Hydro Cannon or an Icicle Spear shielded, then you're feeling like you're in a really good spot because you didn't end up wasting a lot of energy. But if the Earthquake ever gets shielded, then the slow pacing of that expensive nuke move gets exposed, and you're probably going to be in a very negative position. So I think Clodsire is the biggest winner out of this list. Everything here is definitely improved, but unfortunately, without an increase in consistency for the other two, I do think they definitely lag behind Clodsire in a pretty meaningful way. Next up, we have two pretty big buffs to Sliggoo. Sliggoo is now learning Dragon Breath and Body Slam. Now, I honestly had to double check and make sure that I had a Sliggoo because I have not thought about this Pokemon in a very long time. Turns out I did actually save a Sliggoo, so I do have a Sliggoo built from back in the day. Now, Sliggoo, when it comes to moveset here, it's going to be Dragon Breath, Body Slam, and then your choice of Dragon Pulse, Water Pulse, or Sludge Wave. Sliggoo does actually sim pretty well into the meta, but I think that the biggest thing that's going to be a problem for Sliggoo is going to be opportunity cost. There are some very good dragons right now, including Pokemon like Shelgon, and I think Shelgon largely does what Sliggoo wants to do, but just a little bit better. Whereas Body Slam is very fast on Sliggoo, but unfortunately, it's never going to be able to hit for super effective damage. Where Shelgon has access to Twister and Flamethrower, so it's a dragon that has an ability to hit steals for massive super effective damage. So I think the Sliggoo is going to be very solid. If people use it, they'll probably have some pretty decent success, but it's another victim of opportunity cost where I think the buff to Shelgon last season means that Shelgon basically does what Sliggoo would want to do, just in a more convincing manner. The next buff was foreshadowed earlier when I mentioned quite a few water flying types getting buffed. And this buff is Mantine getting access to Twister. This is a massive, massive buff. With the wing attack getting reverted last season, a lot of people hoped that a lot of the wing attackers would return to their former glory. But in the time since wing attack had been nerfed and then got rebuffed once again, Aerial Ace had been nerfed, and this meant that Mantine's pacing, even with wing attack getting fixed, was still dreadful. With Aerial Ace being 45, even with Mantine's massive bulk, it was basically doing nothing. But here comes Twister, a very efficient dragon move, giving brand new coverage over to Mantine, but also giving it that straight 5 pacing back. Now Mantine can finally bid adieu to Aerial Ace. It can let it go. It can run Wing Attack, Twister, and your choice of Water Pulse or Ice Beam. I assume probably Water Pulse to be able to hit steals for at least neutral damage. And Mantine looks to be a pretty nice threat. It's going to depend on how the meta shakes out as to which of these water flyers ends up emerging victorious. If I was a betting man, I would probably lean towards Mantine. I think that Mantine, with its bulk, it has some really, really nice matchups. Twister gives it an ability to absolutely smoke dragons and hit for some pretty nice damage neutrally. Even though it does not get same type attack bonus, Twister is an extremely efficient move. So Mantine is still able to pack a pretty nice punch. So Mantine is a Pokemon that I think at bare minimum is going to be very playable anti-meta. Depending on how the meta shakes out, it could potentially sneak into contention for a meta contender. But for now, I think at the very least, I'm just happy that Mantine could be returning. I think Mantine's a really cool Pokemon, and I like that it's once again going to be playable. Next up, we have a double buff, and I hope you have been spinning a lot of Pokestops and finding Kecleon, because it is getting 2 move updates. Kecleon is now going to learn Thunder Punch and Dynamic Punch. Kecleon already learned Sucker Punch, but now it has a very interesting, very dynamic moveset. Sucker Punch, Thunder Punch, and Dynamic Punch. Add to that the fact that Kecleon has really nice stats. The rank 1 Kecleon is just shy of 2,000 stat product, and Kecleon suddenly has a lot of tools at its disposal. Will Kecleon become the new meta overlord in the Great League? I think the answer is no, but in the upcoming NAIC limited meta that's going to be available for the first 2 weeks of the new season, Kecleon is looking exceedingly, exceedingly strong. Sucker Punch, Thunder Punch, and Dynamic Punch, the triple punch moveset, Kecleon's going to have so much coverage in that meta. That meta has a ton of Psychics, a ton of Normals, and Kecleon is going to be able to hit, at the very least, everything for neutral damage. So I think Kecleon's going to be very strong in that NAIC meta. It could probably have anti-meta play in the Open Great League, but NAIC is definitely where it's going to shine. The next buff we'll be taking a look at is another normal type, and that is the buff to Lopunny. Lopunny is getting 2 move updates. Lopunny already learns an insane amount of moves, and Lopunny is getting 2 more. Remind me to never ever TM a Lopunny for as long as I live. Lopunny is learning Thunder Punch and Shadow Ball. I think unfortunately for Lopunny, it ends up just generally, even with these new improvements, being worse than a lot of other normal types. I think in the NAIC meta, Double is just going to outperform it. I think in the Open Great League, Pokemon like Licky are just going to do its job, but significantly better. This means that in a lot of limited metas that are not NAIC, this Pokemon is going to have basically a complete Swiss Army knife at its disposal. Triple Axle, Fire Punch, Focus Blast, Hyper Beam, Thunder Punch, Shadow Ball. You could build so many different movesets, so I think it's probably going to be a Pokemon that we see a lot of anytime it's eligible for limited metas, just because it's basically now the ultimate Swiss Army knife. As for fast moves, you also have Low Kick and Double Kick, which are slightly different moves, so you can customize what movesets you want here. Personally, I'm not a massive believer in it for Open Great League or for NAIC, but for future limited metas, I think we're probably going to be seeing quite a bit of this Pokemon. I'm realizing now that I never made a slide for Gigalith. Gigalith is learning Lock On. I simmed Gigalith Lock On in the Great League and Ultra League, and honestly just burst out laughing. Its win rate is atrocious. I don't think I've ever simmed something, expected to see decent results, and then see it get one meta win before. So Gigalith, I didn't even make a slide for it. Gigalith, you're gonna have to sim better if you want me to actually make a slide with your name and with your image on it. Yeah, Gigalith, it's not gonna be worth TMing Lock On it. It looks absolutely terrible. Okay, now to the actual Pokemon that I put on this slide, Aromatisse. Aromatisse is getting access to Fairy Wind. Aromatisse currently was stuck on Charm, but it actually has some pretty intriguing charge moves. Now it's going to have Fairy Wind, and it can learn Psyshock, it can learn Moonblast, and Thunderbolt. Psyshock is always going to be a must, and now it can decide whether it wants to try and go for coverage with Thunderbolt, or just try and be a neutral matchup demon with Moonblast. Aromatisse also has some pretty decent stats. It is around like mid 1900s in terms of stat products, so it is pretty bulky across the board. I do think it's a very crowded field of fairy types right now, but I think Aromatisse could look surprisingly decent in the NAIC metas. One of the top dogs in the NAIC meta is Galarian Weezing. So the fact that Aromatisse is a fairy type that could be save switched to potentially bait out a Galarian Weezing and then threaten it for big super effective damage with Psyshock, I think could provide value in that meta. As far as the Open Great League, it looks to be playable anti-meta. I don't think it's going to break into the main meta in a meaningful way, but if you well support it, you could probably run this Pokemon and still manage to get some wins. Next up, we have the double buff to Sylveon. Sylveon is another bulky fairy type. It is also getting access to Fairy Wind, but Sylveon is being blessed because it is getting Shadow Ball. This means Sylveon can now run the moveset that Aromatisse was running, which is Fairy Wind to Psyshock and Moonblast, or it could go for Fairy Wind to Psyshock and Shadow Ball. Sylveon, again, looks to be another Pokemon that could be quite interesting in the upcoming NAIC meta. Having the Shadow Ball coverage does mean that it would have the ability to hit those many Psychic types for big, super effective damage, and it sims pretty decently in the Open Great League as well. Again, probably more in the territory of playable anti-meta. I think this is very cool. I would love if Sylveon at some point got coverage so it could hit for super effective into Steel types. Shadow Ball at the very least lets it hit for neutral into Steel types, so it is more flexible than a Pokemon like Aromatisse that doesn't really have that coverage. I do think that Sylveon is probably going to be a limited meta demon. It's going to be one of these Pokemon where we don't see it a ton in the Open Great League, but in a lot of these limited metas where the power level is just a little bit lower, the fact that it has a very, very strong moveset and really good stats means that it could absolutely shine. Next up, we have one of the hidden gems of this move update, and that is Melmetal learning Dynamic Punch. Melmetal previously ran Legacy Double Iron Bash and Superpower. Superpower is a pretty good move, but comes with a pretty massive drawback. When you throw Superpower, your attack and defense are debuffed. Well, with Dynamic Punch, Melmetal's not going to have to worry about that anymore. It gets 5 more damage on Dynamic Punch. It does cost 5 more energy, but for Melmetal running Thundershock, it's going to be straight 5 to Dynamic and straight 4 to Double Iron Bash. Melmetal is going to be spammy, it's going to hit very hard, and I think Melmetal is going to be a very intriguing contender across all 3 leagues. It is a rare Pokemon that genuinely looks playable in the Master League, it looks playable in the Ultra League, and it looks playable in the Great League. In the Great League, probably leaning towards more anti-meta, but if the meta shapes up in a favorable direction for it, then I could see Melmetal putting in some pretty serious work. Melmetal does have a pretty convincing matchup into Licky, which is nice. A Shadow Ball landing, you're never going to be put into Rollout plus Body Slam range. You're always going to have to throw 2 Shadow Balls, and that's a really big plus for Melmetal. Granted, it's going to be more on the spicier side of things in the Great League, but in the Ultra League, this thing sims very, very well. In the Master League, surprisingly, it was simming pretty well as well. So I'm a pretty big fan of Melmetal. I think at bare minimum, it's going to be a rare mon that you could conceivably win with in every single league. I might try and use it later in the season because I did get an idea from a viewer where they said you should try and win with the same team in all 3 leagues. And I think with Melmetal getting this dynamic punch buff and getting way better consistency, I think that video idea might actually be a real possibility. The next update is Conkeldurr getting access to Force Palm. Force Palm has absolutely incredible stats for a fast move. So far, they've been very careful with what they give Force Palm to. They gave it to Lucario. I believe they gave it to Breloom and Menshao, 2 Pokemon that we all know are absolutely atrocious. Conkeldurr is an interesting choice. Conkeldurr has actually seen meta play before. It was in the Master Premier Cup back when Counter was very strong, but Conkeldurr does have some intriguing coverage. Conkeldurr, as a part of its Calm Day, got access to Brutal Swing, and for its nuke move, it could run Dynamic Punch or it could run Stone Edge. Stone Edge does give it really interesting coverage, but means that it could struggle in some neutral matchups. Just because in the Master League, even if you have a move that's as good as Force Palm, you're not really going to be farming things down in the 2s. You actually need that charge attack damage. So Dynamic Punch would give it really nice pacing, but obviously wouldn't quite have the coverage into Flyers. I imagine now with Force Palm, Conkeldurr is probably going to be playable anti-meta in both the Great and the Ultra League. As far as Master League goes, in the Open Masters, it's just going to get overrun by the fact that it doesn't have the stats to compete. But I do think that in Master Premier, it could potentially actually have some play once again, now that it is no longer stuck in the prison of having to run counter. Annihilate could get away with running counter because it has an incredibly overpowered typing, and Rage Fist is just an incredibly busted move. Conkeldurr had neither. It didn't have a busted move, and it didn't have an amazing typing. It was just a pure fighting type. It was pretty trash, but with Force Palm, it is definitely going to be meaningfully improved. Next up, we have a Pokemon that I asked to be buffed, and it looks like they have delivered. Galarian Zapdos is learning Low Kick. However, this is where I have to be the bearer of bad news. I don't believe this is the buff that's going to revitalize Galarian Zapdos. I had such high hopes after seeing Galarian Zapdos was buffed, but after simming it, man, it looked very, very disappointing. Galarian Zapdos at its prime, when Counter was at its peak, it had a lot of fast attack pressure. Counter was a pretty balanced move, I would say, in terms of like fast move damage versus energy generation, but with Zapdos' high attack stat, it could farm a lot of things down and then exit with charge attacks loaded to peel away shields from the opponent's backline. But with Low Kick does basically no damage, so Zapdos is forced to take knockouts with charge moves, and when you're a Pokemon as glassy as Zapdos, I think that ends up being a pretty big net negative. As if you're in a matchup where an opponent has even moderate fast move pressure, Zapdos is probably getting farmed down. So I'm a little bit disappointed here. Not even a little bit. Why should I kid myself? I'm pretty disappointed. I hope I'm wrong. I hope Galarian Zapdos proves me wrong and is amazing. I have a top 100 rank Ultra League Galarian Zapdos that I got from Daily Adventure Incense and used a Master Ball on that I would love to bring out of retirement. I want Zapdos to be good so badly. But man, the Sims left a very bitter taste in my mouth. As Galarian Zapdos, I believe it was the Zeros where Zapdos did look pretty interesting just because it's a mon that has a bunch of nuke moves, right? Anytime you're sending a mon that has a move like Brave Bird in the Zeros, it's going to look pretty good because Brave Bird does a ton of damage, but the more shields that are in play, the fact that it just can't have any kind of meaningful fast move pressure really gets exposed, and its win rate absolutely falls off a cliff. Next up, we have Quaquaval. Quaquaval is a Pokemon that I always forget is in this game. It had an entire Calm Day, and I don't really remember it. It's a Pokemon that has very similar stats to Morpeko. It is very, very frail. Its moveset has always been pretty good. Like this season, its moveset was Wing Attack, Close Combat, and Hydro Cannon. That's an incredibly good moveset, and it still really didn't do much. So now it's getting access to Low Kick. And this just gives it another tool in its arsenal, but unfortunately, the Pokemon that's using that arsenal is very, very flawed. So I don't think this is going to do a lot for Quaquaval. I imagine if you're like a very strong player, you can probably use Quaquaval, pair with some good picks, and still have winning sets. But I really don't think that Quaquaval is going to be a particularly useful Pokemon on its own. It's another one in a very long line of glass cannons, where if you're able to get it up energy, up a shield, then maybe it can do something, but if your opponent has any kind of fast move pressure, it's not going to be able to do anything because it's just going to get farmed down. So Quaquaval, unfortunately, kind of ends up just being worse Poliwrath as a whole. And considering that Poliwrath doesn't really see a lot of play, that's not a strong endorsement of Quaquaval's ability in PvP. Next up, we have the developers once again trying to make Ledian meta relevant. This one has gotten so many buffs, and this season it's getting 2. Ledion's getting access to Rollout and Acrobatics. They have repeatedly buffed Ledion so many times trying to make this mon work, and unfortunately it hasn't really worked up to this point. Ledion has truly stupid stats. It is so bulky, but unfortunately it has one of the worst typings you could ever ask for in Bug and Flying. Now with Rollout and Acrobatics, the moveset's going to be Rollout, Dynamic Punch, and Acrobatics, so its moveset honestly is pretty incredible. Ledion in the Sims honestly does look kind of underwhelming still. I will say in the zeros up a Rollout, Ledion looks incredible. So Ledion could potentially try and be like an end game sweeper where if you're able to get shields down, get up a tiny amount of energy, then Ledion's win rate was honestly massive. But in those even scenarios, Ledion does look like it struggles over time, presumably due to the fact that its fast move does not get same type attack bonus, so you're really reliant on having to throw charge attacks at everything to take knockouts, and even if you're able to get them on low, it's very difficult to farm them down with non-same type attack bonus rollout. So I think this is probably the closest Ledion's ever been to meta relevancy. It's still going to be like anti-meta at absolute best, but hey, I do appreciate the fact that the developers, even though they seem to absolutely love like fast move pressure degen stuff, like they're bringing back Gastrodon for no reason, it took them until now to finally nerf Wigglytuff, they also for whatever reason seem to love Ledion. Next up we have a former meta mon that is attempting to return to glory, and that is Starmie getting access to Aqua Jet. Starmie is a very frail Pokemon. It is around 1700 stat product, and its current moveset was Psywave, Surf, and Power Gem. Psywave to Surf was 12-11, and being as glassy as Starmie is, it could not afford to be that slow. That's what drove it out of the meta, was the fact that Starmie just got outpaced by everything. With Aqua Jet, Starmie is now going to have straight 10 pacing. This is a pretty significant buff for Starmie. I do think that the field of being a water type right now is very crowded, so I think the opportunity cost of dropping a different water type to run Starmie will probably limit its play, but Starmie should be a very strong limited meta Pokemon and probably pretty playable in the Open Great League as well. Starmie also has really nice coverage options for its secondary charge move. It can run Power Gem, it can run Ice Beam, it can run Thunder, and the fact that it's able to have more consistent, cheaper water damage is a pretty big plus for it. Next up, we have a buff that a lot of people are very, very hype about, and that is the buff to Kingdra. Kingdra is now getting access to Surf. This means that Kingdra finally has a water move that is worth something. Octazooka has always been awful, and with Kingdra, a big worry for trainers was the consistency. Outrage to Swift, if you end up landing the Outrage or having the Swift shielded, you're in a really good spot, but if the reverse is true, if they call a Swift or shield an Outrage, you're probably in a losing matchup. But now with Surf, Kingdra is actually going to be ditching Outrage and just running Surf and Swift. The Surf and Swift, Kingdra is going to have a lot less difference between his bait and Snook move in terms of the pacing, and that means it should hopefully become a lot more consistent of a Pokemon. A lot of trainers in the community have very high hopes that Kingdra will actually break through and be a meta pick. Kingdra, its stats are okay. It does have a truly incredible typing. Water Dragon is one of the best typings in the game. I think Kingdra does have a really good shot to break into meta status. I think the thing that could hold it back is the fact that now it doesn't really hit very hard. Surf is a pretty solid move, but having a strong dragon move was a definite plus for Kingdra. I don't think Kingdra can ever run Surf Outrage because then it's just simply too slow. You can't be 12 to your first move without being very, very bulky. Azumarill's 15 to its first move, but Azumarill has a stupendous stat product, so it's okay. But a Pokemon like Kingdra, it needs the speed of Swift. And now with Surf being a little bit faster, I think Kingdra has a decent shot of being a contender. I think people will try it a lot at first, and then its usage will end up fading over time. So I think it will be a meta contender to start with, just in terms of usage, but I don't think it's going to be a sustained presence. I do think, however, as it is currently, every time there's a limited meta where Kingdra is allowed, you're going to see entirely too many people running Kingdra. As we move towards the end of these updates, I have combined a few. We have the Shadow Ballers, Xatu, Sylveon, Quillfish, and Lopunny. You can see here, I was really starting to get crunched for time, so I didn't even get the assets on this slide. This slide, we got no pictures, we don't have anything. But okay, the Shadow Ballers. Xatu previously was stuck with basically zero good coverage moves. Xatu had access to Peck and Psyshock, which is really good, but its options for a coverage move were like Aerial Ace or Ominous Wind, which are both just absolutely awful moves. With Shadow Ball, Xatu could be a spicy, very fun pick for the NAIC meta. I don't think it's going to be doing much in the Open Great League, but it's probably going to be playable spice. Quillfish is another Pokemon that is already a limited meta demon, and it's just going to get better in those limited metas. I don't see Quillfish breaking into the open leagues, but having access to Shadow Ball, previously in limited metas, I very frequently ran Aqua Tail plus Scald, because having that 665 pacing and being able to hit for significantly more damage really felt better on Quillfish than having to farm all the way up to 7 for Ice Beam. But with Shadow Ball being 665 on Quillfish, I think people are going to no longer run Scald and instead just run Aqua Tail and Shadow Ball, because Shadow Ball is such an efficient move. Pairing that with Quillfish's attack stat, even without same type attack bonus, Quillfish should still retain its status as a limited meta demon. And I think we've already talked about Lopunny and Sylveon already, so I don't really have to go over those. But alright, the Shadow Ballers are done. And finally, I have saved the worst for last, the change that breaks my heart. They are once again buffing Rhyperior. We finally got rid of Rhyperior. We had a Master League meta that was free of the RPS mon, and they're bringing it back. Rhyperior is now getting access to Drill Run in this new season. Why did they do this? I think without question, this season's Master League was one of the best Master Leagues we've ever had. There was very little RPS. Almost everything had play into everything. Pokemon like Reshiram and Zekrom were hyper neutral. Lunala was really flexible as well. And Shadow Rhyperior is here to just be very inaccessible and to just be too strong. Shadow Rhyperior beats Lunala in the 0s and the 2s. It now means that Pokemon like Reshiram and Zekrom are no longer going to be super flexible save switches. And man, I just hate this. I played so much Master League this season. I absolutely loved Master League. And I think this buff is going to ruin the Master League meta. I don't like being a doomer. I usually like to be an optimist. I think this is a horrendous change. It's also a very difficult change to undo because so many Pokemon learn Drill Run. The consequences of Rhyperior being this strong means that Kyogre is going to be absolutely everywhere. Kyogre was already very strong this season, but people are going to be running it even more. Additionally, a Pokemon like Palkia, which I would argue was pretty underwhelming this season. I would even call it bad in this season's Master League. Palkia is going to be back in a huge way as a very hard answer to Rhyperior. And Reshiram and Zekrom are going to see dramatic fall-offs in usage because they're no longer going to be as safe. Again, I can't stress enough, I find this to be an incredibly disappointing change. I think this season's Master League was easily one of the best. It was a very flexible meta. You saw Reshiram and Zekrom almost every game, but you almost always had play in every single game. The games very frequently came down to who played better. And I think that is the symbol of a very strong meta. Having a meta where you just put the Rhyperior on the Reshiram and you win, or your Rhyperior gets on the Kyogre and you lose, I think that's a terrible meta. That's not nearly as skill-based as having a lot of mirror matches between like Lunala, Reshiram, Zekrom, and Xerneas, and trying to have to manage your energy and navigate through a game where there's a lot of chess pieces in common to try and emerge victorious. So I'm pretty frustrated by this change. I know I usually try and be optimistic. I think this change is terrible. I'm very worried about the Master League. I think this change, it's also the fact that Shadow Rhyperior is so inaccessible. I believe Shadow Rhyperior currently isn't available in grunts, and that just makes a bad situation even worse. Not only is the Shadow substantially better than the regular, but the Shadow is very difficult to get, so unless you have a very good IV Shadow, you're kind of out of luck, and I think that is just terrible. All right, we have done it. Enough dooming about the Master League. We have made it through. We're probably like 45 minutes to an hour into this video. So if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. These have been my thoughts on all of the changes that are happening this season. We've got a lot to look forward to in season 27 of Go Battle League, and I'm going to be with you every step of the way. First week of the season, going to be doing my usual 2 uploads per day, maybe even 3, probably not 3, except for that very first day. So we're going to be pumping out a lot of content here. If you enjoy content like this, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. Analytics say a lot of people who watch the videos are not subscribed, so make sure you double check, hit that bell so that way you don't miss an upload. And I do want to give an extra special thank you, as always, to our channel members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide to the channel is so sincerely appreciated. So thank you guys oh so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.